Welcome to the introduction to the Zohar chapter 6, the introduction of the Zohar chapter 6. This is also our sixth lesson that we are studying together, and I deeply appreciate everyone who has participated, commented, etc. so far. We are continuing to expound on the Bereshit, on the first verse of Genesis, on the creation of the world, which is, for obvious reasons, an important verse. An extremely important verse when it comes to the concepts and ideas that the Zohar is trying to teach us and introduce. So we begin with the word Bereshit. Now, as we learn together today's selection from the Zohar is very similar to the general midrashic literature that many may be familiar with. It's not particularly mystical, which we found similarly when Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, discussed the idea of mi and ma, who and what. It sounded a lot like normal, ordinary midrashic literature, and then his father, Rabbi Shimon, joined the conversation or took over the conversation and directed it in a much more mystical, Zoharic type explanation, which kind of took us off into the spiritual world. Now, we'll see similar pattern when other sages, also come back down to earth for a little bit. Of course, there's many deep spiritual concepts that we're going to study today. Today, let's study the words of Rav Hamnuna Sava. Rav Hamnuna Sava Omar. Rav Hamnuna the sage. A Saba is an elder sage. Rav Hamnuna the elder sage said when he expounded on the word Bereshit, Ashkechan Asvan Bihipucha. We find in this verse Bereshit in the beginning, or it says Bereshit in the beginning, bara Elokim et. So we see Bereshit bara, the first two words of the Torah. In the beginning, God created. Bereshit bara is bet and bet, those two words. And then the next one is Elokim, which is God, et, which is the next to our Aleph. So the first two words begin with a bet, which is the second letter in the Hebrew alphabet. The second two words begin with Aleph, the first two letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So we find the letters are backwards. Bet bikadmisa uluvasar. We have the word bet for the first word and the one following. Bet bikadmisa in bireshit bara uluvasar, like I just explained. And Aleph bikadmisa uluvasar. And then after that, we have an Aleph, which comes at the next word, the first of the next words, which is Elokim, the third word, and the one after it. Aleph bikadmisa hainu Elokim et livasar. So what's going on here? Why is it this way? One would have thought that that the Torah would start with the letter Aleph, which is the first letter, right? So if it chose bet and it chose this pattern, there must have been a reason for it. There must have been something behind it. And what Rav Hamnuna is about to introduce to us here is a concept which, again, is very deeply embedded in the mystical literature. And of course, as with the other concepts, it has its origins in the non-mystical Jewish literature, in the Midrashic literature especially. But the Zohar gives a special spin to it, which kind of gives it a different type of authority, a different type of spiritual meaning. And the idea that God used the letters of the alphabet to create the world and to create many different aspects of the world. So giving a special holiness to the letters, but not just a holiness, which pre-Zohar, one could easily have taken a more Maimonidean rationalistic approach that the letters don't have inherent holiness or specialness. They're holy because of what we use them to do, right? They're special because we treat them with in veneration because of what they mean to us, how they communicate to us. But here, the Zohar is kind of leaning in much deeper on the idea of the significance of the letters and making the letters the actual means with which God created the world. And of course, when we know God created the world through speech, we speak through words, and words are, of course, formed through letters. And of course, those would be letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And interestingly, it's important to remember, the historicity, and again, I'm not really going that much into the historicity of the Zohar. We're just studying it to learn the ideas and concepts. but the Aleph Bet that we see in front of us, that the Zohar is referring to, those letters are called the Assyrian alphabet. The exact origins of this alphabet, really started at some point in the beginning of the Second Temple period, when the Jews came back from the uh, exile, the Babylonian/Persian exile, back to the land of Israel. Prior to that, the alphabet being used was the early Hebrew alphabet. So just bear that in mind as we learn this, but we're going to be focusing on that Hebrew alphabet as we know and see it today, and that's the one that we're referring to. So Aleph, it would be the first letter, and Bet, of course, the second letter. And let's see what the Zohar has to say. When God wanted to create the world, kol osfan havu setimen, all the letters were still kind of early in their stages. They were hidden. They were just, steamen means they hadn't yet come out and revealed themselves. Utrein alfin shnin, and for 2,000 years, ad delah bira alma, prior to the creation of the world, Hava mistakel kutchabrichu ishtashabahu. God was looking at these letters and playing with them and using them, kind of contemplating how he was going to go about the idea of creation. What exactly this means, of course, is not something we would ever understand. It's not something the Zohar expects anyone to ever understand. The concept of God playing with the letters, and how is there even time prior to creation? Those are issues that I can't really address. But and those are questions we could never answer. Those belong to the me, to the who, to the that we can ask questions about, but we can never understand or answer. But this is the image that the Zohar is trying to portray, that God is playing with these letters and thinking about how to build this world. Now, as we see the idea in the Zohar and the idea in Jewish mysticism in general, that there were other worlds and times and so on prior to the world that we see, is very prevalent. We see it popping up a lot. We'll see it more even today. And how much bearing this has on the famous question of age of the universe, etc., and what does it mean there were previous worlds? It's something that you can use your own imaginations and come to. But anyway, let's again. I'm giving you ideas. You can take them where you want to, but I'm going to try to stay focused on learning the text. Kad ba'al lemivre alma. So then it came time to create the world. So asu kol asvan kamei misofa reshayu. Each and every one of the letters came from the last letters to the beginning letters. So the assumption here is that the order of the letters is something preordained and holy, which is inherent to the letters. The Aleph Bet all the way down to the last letter Taf. All right. So Shariat Ot Taf Leme'al Beresha. The first letter that came was the last letter of the alphabet, which was the letter Taf. Humran, she said, they're all referred to in a feminine language. She said before God, Ribon Alman, master of the universe, Nicha Kamach Lemivre Bi Alma. It should be good for you to build the world out of me, out of Taf. Now, just to say is we can obviously understand this in a more midrashic type style, that, it doesn't really, it means, what kind of world do you want to build? Do you want to build the kind of world which reflects the values that I reflect? And what are those values? I am the signature of your seal, right? Of the word emet, the word truth. The word emet, of course, ends with the letter taf. I'm sorry, excuse me. And as we know from the Gemara, the Talmud, and Masechet Shabbos, Masechet Shabbat, I think it's page 55, where it says the seal of God is emes, is truth. And the Zohar, of course, is using that idea from Chazal, from the standard rabbinic literature, and saying, I am therefore the seal, and I end that word with emet, truth. So Ya'ot Lamalka, it would be good for the king, Lemishre Ba'ot Emet, Ulemivre Bi Alma, to use the letter, to use the letters of the Emet, and to begin the creation with me. This idea that the creation should begin with the last letter is an interesting idea. begin with the creation. And I would suggest that this means, and the reason why we started with the last letter of the alphabet rather than the first, is because there's an ultimate purpose, an ultimate end to the universe. When you create a universe, what you're thinking about is where I want it to go, where I want it to end, what do I want it to achieve. And that way you would be thinking about that from the beginning. So Amar la Kutchabrichu, so God said to him, Ya'ot ant v'zaka ant. Yes, it's true. You are a good letter, right? And you are very righteous. A special truth is special. A world built on the foundation of truth is a special world. But it's not a good idea. You're not worthy enough to create the world with you. Because one day, if you study in the book of Ezekiel, right, in Ezekiel chapter 9, we learn of the story of it's discussed there, the destruction of Jerusalem, and upon all the foreheads of the people who are not worthy of survival, right? I'm sorry, who are worthy of survival, the letter tough will be placed on their foreheads so that the angels of destruction will know those who don't have that mark, tough, right, will die, right? So the kimu raisame aleph tough, right? And this is also a reference to the Gemara in Shabbos, the Talmud, which says that why the letter tough was chosen in Ezekiel to be the mark of the righteous, because if you had the letter tough, it means you kept the Torah from Aleph to Taf, from beginning to end. Those that did not have the mark were marked for, or were unmarked, they were destroyed. So because people have your mark, right? Others died, right? So you are associated with death. Now, it's a beautiful idea that a world that's completely and 100% truth is a world without place for those who aren't 100% truthful, which is most of us, right? Which would ultimately bring about their death and destruction of everyone who is not 100%, right? So you represent the 100%. Now, since most people are not 100%, that is not the kind of world that I want, God is saying. I don't want to build a world on tough. I don't want to build a world on only perfection, because the human beings, the people, the creatures that are going to be living and functioning and in my world are not going to be perfect, and I don't want it to be result in death. The ode de antchotama de mavet. And on a similar note, you are not just the last letter of the word emet, truth, but you are also the last word of the word, the last letter of the word mavet, which means death. So hol ve'ant kach, because of this, lest ant kedai lemivrei bach alma, it's not worthwhile to build the world out of you. So miyad nafka, so tough, left God's chambers and made room for his next pal, the shin, which is the going backwards. That's the letter that precedes tough. So olat ot shin kame. So in walks the letter shin. Amra Kameh, and the letter Shin says before him, Ribon Alman, master of the universe. Nicha Kamach Lemivre Bi Alma. Right? It should be well for you to build the world out of me. Why? Because Devi Ikre Shemach Shaddai. Because one of the names of God we know is Shin Daled Yud. Shaddai, right? And or Shakai. I feel and halachically there's backing for what I'm saying for those of you that are concerned about pronouncing God's name, that when one is learning a holy text and one is reading about God, that one actually should use the name, the proper pronunciation of the name of God, right, as special honor, as opposed to in regular speech when one is just talking, one should not use the name specifically. But that, which is why I read the Dalit, and someone offline can discuss with me the halachic ramifications of that if they want to. But anyway, I'm just defending myself here. But regardless, this name, Shin Dalid Yud, right, is the name of God. And I begin that name, Shin, right? We know the letter Shin is on our tefillin, is on phylacteries, because it represents the name of God. V'ya'ot lemivre alma bishma kadisha. And if you're going to build the world, you should build it out of my name. So Amar Allah, so God answered him, Ya'os ant. It is true, right? It is special, and you're right, and you're a very special letter. It's interesting how God, so to speak, talks to these letters. He doesn't tell them he didn't say to Toph, reject them outright. He says, yes, you're a very special letter. You're a wonderful person, but you're not right for this situation. He says the same thing to Shin, right? In the same manner. But unfortunately, those letters that refer to falseness, right, to forgery, right, to ziyufa, to lying, are also, when they attach themselves to you, they mean the worst thing. Sheker, right? The word sheker is falseness. So if you take a kuf resh and we add them to you, right, we get something terrible that I don't want this world to be a representative of, which is sheker, which is the opposite of the kind of world that I would want to build. So says God. So now, therefore I do not want to create the world out of you. To begin the loyis kayam shikra ella I yitlun lach kar, right? The sheker, the falseness, lying, will only exist with you, right? Because in order to build sheker, we need to add you to the letters kuf and resh. And then he continues a little bit on the discussion of sheker, of lying, and he says, "Mikan, we see man de boy lememar shikra, that somebody who wants to tell a lie, yitol yisoda dikshot bekadmisa uluvasar yokim le shikra. If a person wants to tell a lie that's going to last, a lie that people are going to believe, you should start with a little bit of truth. And of course, this is famous saying in Chazal. The sages said this, that any lie for a lie to work, it has to have a little kernel of truth in it, and then you embellish it with embellishments that are less than true, right? Then you have a lie that people will listen to. But if it's total baloney, if there's absolutely nothing true about it at all, then most people will see right through it. And we see that from these words, because Yitel Yisoda Dikshot, you take the letter Shin, which its essence is good, its essence is something true, right? Bekadmisa in the beginning, Ulevasar Yukim Le Shikra, and then the lie that you tell afterwards will last, will work. To us kishot you, because the letter is a letter of truth. The letter Shin that it starts with is a letter of truth. Us kishot da avosand is yachaduba. Remember that the letter Shin is the beginning of the name of Shin Dalad Yod of Shakai, which is God's name, which is the name with which the patriarchs communed and spoke with God. Remember, we know that God tells Moshe Rabbeinu in the book of Exodus, he tells Moses that until now I spoke with the patriarchs with the name Shakai, and now from you I speak with the name of Yud K Vav K, right? The tetragrammaton, as you will. I didn't, but with the patriarchs I communed with the name Shakai. So the letter Shin is a very special letter. But Kar, Osvan, but if you take the two letters of Kuf and Resh, those are letters Ischaziu al Sitra Bisha, right? Which belong to they are letters that are seen, they find their place on the evil side of things, and that's where they land. Uvigin is Kayama, but in order to give themselves life, not lay us shin begavayo, they have to grab the shin, vahave kesher, and then there's a tie between them, kesher, which is again those same letters, kuf shin resh, given the chomat hachi nafkat mikame, right? So once she heard this, the letter shin left. Now, this idea that the side of evil, right, represented here by these letters kuf and resh, have a little bit of spirituality, a little bit of specialness, represented here by the letter shin, in order to give it life. And also the idea that there's such a thing as letters that are associated with the evil side, letters associated with the good side. This, of course, is an idea that the Zohar is going to discuss many, many times, and this idea that is permeated throughout the world of Jewish mysticism and the world of mysticism in general, giving significance and meaning to these letters. So I just, I want to point that out, because that's, of course, an important part of what's going on here. So this is, of course, the letter Shin. Now, as we continue, we're going to continue to go up. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do everything, all the letters today in this one lecture. I might divide this up because, of course, we have 22 letters of the alphabet. Each one is fascinating, and the discussion is fascinating. But let's do the next one. The next letter is the letter Tzadi or Tzadik, right? The original name is the letter Tzadi, but it's often called in Hebrew today, it's often called Tzadik. Now, those of you that are familiar with Hebrew recognize the word Tzadik. Tzadik is the name of a righteous person, is what we call a righteous person. Tzadi is just the name of the letter. But if you know the form of the letter, and I suggest that if you don't know, if you're familiar with Hebrew, you see it in your head. If you don't, look it up. The letter Tzadi can be seen as a yud, right, which is one of the small letters, connected to the letter nun, which is another letter. Both letters we're going to discuss individually soon. But olat ot tzadi amra kameh. So the letter tzadi comes in front of God, and he says, or she says, her explanation why she thinks she should be the letter. Ribon Alma, master of the universe, Nicha kamach lemivrei bi Alma. It would be good for you, right, to create the world with me, the ana bi chatimin tzadikim, because I am the sign of tzadikim, of the righteous, right? It kiriyat tzadik, and you, God yourself, are called a tzadik, a righteous person, right? So this is all about you. Be Rashim, right? As it says in, because the word begins with a tzaddik, ki tzaddik Adonai tzedakot ahev, as it says in the verse in Tehillim in Psalms 11, right? Because God is a tzaddik, right? And he loves tzaddikim, he loves righteousness. Uviyaot lemivre alma. And it would be good for you, and you should want to build the world out of me. Remember, what would be a world of tzaddik, a world built on the righteousness of God? It would be a world of only righteousness. It would be a world of pure righteousness, which sounds wonderful, but it's not the kind of world that God wanted to create. God wanted to create a world like the one we see, which he did create, which is not all righteousness. It's a place where we strive for it, work for it, cherish it, try to build it, try to support it, but it's a world in which righteousness has to be worked on, has to be achieved. It's not a world of pure righteousness. And God then answers, Amar la tzadi. And God says to the tzadi, tzaddik ant, it's true, you are a tzaddik, you are a special. And by the way, I didn't emphasize before that kuf and resh, who were the next two letters, were rejected because they were false. They were part of the word sheker. So when God rejected shin, because shin was attached to kuf and resh, he thus rejected kuf and resh as well. I didn't emphasize that. And they also left. So that's why we're up to the letter tzaddik. We didn't skip kuf and resh. They were just kicked out. They never even had a chance to make their case because they're on the evil side, like we said before. So again, let's go back to the tzaddik, right? So you tzaddik, you are special. The tzaddik ant iskirias, and you are called a tzaddik. Aval ant tzorich lemeve tmira. But I need to keep you on the side. I need to keep you hidden away. And I do believe that the idea here is that the world of pure righteousness, that's the world to come. That's something that's going to come down the road. That's not the world I'm creating now, God is saying. It's not the actual world we live in, right? Less an tzarich iskalia kolkach begin to lola me'av piskon pela alma, right? I don't want you to come out into the open, right? Because if you would come out into the open, then the world would have a complaint, a pitchon peh. The world would have a complaint, and it's not 100% clear what this means, but usually in Chazal in the sages, a pitchon peh refers to some form of excuse, right? If I created the world of pure righteousness, right, and the idea sounds to me like the following, just knowing what pitchon peh usually means, it means that if I create a world where everything has to be pure righteousness, then those who aren't will be able to say, I can't achieve that. I can never be that. That have an excuse. So I might as well just forget it. If what you want is pure righteousness and pure perfection, right? That's not something that all of us can achieve. And we would have a pitchun peh, we would have an excuse for our lives. God wants to create a world where we all know, right? The fact that we're not perfect is not an excuse to not try harder and not continue to try. So, but as we continue discussing the letter tzaddik, we said, "My time on nun ihi," right? What is the reason for this, right? Why is it that you are not the right word, and that by having you exist, right, you would having the world created through you, there would be a pitchon peh. Because let's look at you as a letter, Mr. Or Mrs. Tzadi, right? Because nun ihi, you are a nun, right? You start off looking like the letter nun, and asya yud dishma de bris kadisha, and then the yud, right, which is in the name of the holy covenant, comes virachiv Allah and rides upon the nun. So the nun bends over a little, and the yud of the special covenant, which refers, of course, to the covenant of the circumcision, the brit milah, right? So the yud is a small dot, which generally connotes a seed. The seed, which of course emanates from the brit, from the circumcision, from the organ that is circumcised, the male organ, the nun, right, bends over and receives that seed, right? So, and that's how the letter tzadi is built. So, virachiv Allah bahada, and it kind of rides upon it. So viraza da, and this special secret is a special secret which has to be reserved for later. Kadbra kutcha brichul adam arishon du partzufin birao. When God created Adam, right? Again, this is a reference to the Chazal, the famous Chazal, the famous words of the rabbinic sages, that God created Adam. He had two faces. God, there was one being, because this is one way of understanding the verse Zacharu nekevel bara'am. God created Adam as a male and female in one body, and then he split them, which is one way of understanding the what often is called the rib that he fashioned the woman out of. One way of understanding it wasn't a rib; it was divided in half. The male half and the female half then became two separate creatures. So, and the tzadi is built on the nun, which stands for nekeva, female, and the yud of the dot, which represents the seed, right? Uvegin kach, and this special secret, anpoi di yud mehadar lo achora, right? And this is why the yud is on the back of the woman, because the original creation had male and female facing in different directions, so their backs were to each other. Kigavna da, in this way, right? V'lo is hadru anpin bi anpin kigavna da, but they were not looking face to face. Of course, in the tradition, the usual way that men and women are together when they have intercourse and when they're together is face to face. So that the original way was back to back, right? And the tzadi represents this back to back idea. Istakal le'ela kigavna da. Look up like this form. It seems that in the original Zohar, which was originally printed as pamphlets that came out piece by piece, there must have been a drawing, right? Istakolas lesato kigavna da, right? So so even though they're turned back to back, the tzaddik, right, is and looking downwards in this way. So Amar la Kuchabrichu, so God says, so this special secret that the male and female began back to each other and then came looking towards each other, right, is a special secret. The anozamin lenasor lach umebalach apin bi apin, right? That one day I'm going to change you, Mr. Tzadi. I'm going to change you from being a world where there was back to back to a world where there is looking at each other face to face. Right? But this is going to be in another place, in another time, when you will be removed. In other words, you as the back to back representation will be removed and become something else. So you tzaddik represent what used to be. You represent when men and women looked away from each other. And I would venture to suggest that if we look, I can't remember the exact verse in Hosea, where Hosea and the prophet Hosea, where he says that that one day in the future, when the future day in the future time, no longer will a woman look at a man and say, Ba'ali, you own me, right? But rather, right, you are my man. We are together. This idea that the back to back, which represents men and women looking away from each other, human beings of the two genders having some sort of division between them, that I'm looking this way, you're looking that way, different goals, different objectives, and thus some levels of strife. One day in the future, you tzaddik, who represent the back to back, right? It's not going to be any that true anymore. It's going to be face to face. They're going to be together, looking at each other, working together. That day in the future is coming, but you tzadi right now are built in such a way that represents the back to back. So again, this is another understanding of why the letter tzadi had to be rejected as the creation of the world, because God is creating a world which, yes, now there may be a back to back, but one day He wants it to be a world of face to face. That's a really beautiful idea. And because there's a lot left, we're still up to the letter Fe. I think it's a good place for us to stop and continue our next lecture about the letter Fe. I hope you enjoyed this one. Looking forward to studying the rest of Rav Hamnuna's exposition on why certain letters were rejected as the letters of creation, and eventually, of course, why the letter Bet, the first word of Bereshit, which is the second, not the first letter of the alphabet, was chosen. We're going to get to that soon. Once again, I wish everyone a wonderful, wonderful day, and I really hope you enjoy this, and I hope you learned something from this, and I really do very much welcome comments. If you want to email me directly, it's weinrebsaul@gmail.com. That's WEINREBSAUL@gmail.com. Or you can comment openly on YouTube, which is my preferred way, because then everyone gets to see our conversations. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.